Okay, so when was the last time you made an oath or a vow? And I realize as I'm saying that, I'm not saying vows like A-E-I-O-U, okay, a vow. Why make an oath or a vow? How important, how real are the promises I make to other people or to God? Can you trust what I say? Trust what I do? Is it that important that I have to swear, and that would be not curse, but swear to God something between me and another person? Is it okay to break an oath or a vow? Well, some oaths we would be familiar with in our society today, mostly public. Wrote down ones that came to my mind. Medical, the Hippocratic Oath. I'm assuming they still do that, doctor. Military, an oath to defend the Constitution. Lawyers, an oath to support the Constitution. New U.S. citizen takes a naturalization oath. And then politicians, right? Oath to fulfill an office. And I wrote down here scout oath. And for something I must have said for 30 years, and I was having a hard time coming up with it when I was thinking about this. But so the scouts have an oath. And most familiar, the court system. Take an oath to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God. An FYI there, no longer have to cite God as our witness in a court of law. That's optional. If you don't want to go there, you can say, I solemnly, sincerely, and truly declare and affirm the truth as I know it. So today's confessional study, chapter 23. This chapter addresses oaths in the first 4 paragraphs and vows in paragraph 5. So what is the difference between an oath and a vow? Both are solemn promises. An oath is a promise made between men with God as witness. A vow is a promise made to the Lord. Admittedly, I, going into this, wondered why getting our theology right around oaths and vows was here. Quoting Sam Waldron helps here. He says, a major issue here is the lawfulness or the legitimacy of oaths. Is it in tune with God's word to make an oath, a vow, and also calling upon God to witness and judge such an oath or vow? The Anabaptists of the days in the 1600s cited Matthew 5, 33 through 37, and James 5:12 as good reason not to make an oath. Back then, a major piece of the problem was the Anabaptists' rejection of being a member of the church because of one's tie to the government. If the government calls on us to take an oath, and that was the crux of it, we Anabaptists do not recognize them as a lawful authority. Also, Waldron stated the making and the breaking of oaths at that time was prevalent. And I just wrote down here what the old preacher in Ecclesiastes says, right? Nothing new under the sun. So, are there lawful oaths to make? Throughout history, recorded in our Bibles, have oaths and vows been made by God's people? Was God pleased with the promises made? Contrary to the Anabaptists, the writers of the Westminster, the Savoy, and this London Baptist Confession all believed there was a time for oaths to be made. There was a way for an oath to be made. And there was a seriousness in making an oath before God. Some scriptures here. Deuteronomy 6:13. Is it the Lord your God? It is the Lord your God you shall fear. Him shall you serve, and by his name you shall swear. Hebrews 6:13 and 16. We're going to get into that a little bit more in depth. But the promise of redemption for his people. In Hebrews 6, God swore to his own name to that promise coming to pass. Genesis 24, 1 through 3, Abraham, he's close to death. Commands of his servant, put your hand under my thigh, that I may make you swear by the Lord, the God of heaven and the God of earth, to not take a wife from the Canaanites for Isaac. So there's this seriousness of making this oath. Joseph in Genesis 47, 30 through 31, he says, swear to me, do not bury me in Egypt. Swear to me that you won't bury me in Egypt. And then under the laws of Moses, Numbers 5:19, 1 Kings 8:31, Exodus 22. Those are all examples of conflicts as you go through those laws, conflicts between parties, between people, that the truth needed to be told. And an oath was invoked so that everybody knew, this was true. So now the confession's words on how we should look at and handle, and the key here is lawful oaths and vows. So paragraph 1. A lawful oath is an act of religious worship in which the person swearing the truth, righteousness, and judgment solemnly calls God to witness what he swears and to judge him according to the truth or the falseness of it. So an oath is an act of religious worship. Calling upon God, whom we worship, to witness the thing we are swearing to, affirming to, in his name, to do or keep, can go no higher. Can go no higher. This is not, and these are the things that come to my mind, this is not a pinky swear. Okay, this is not a cross your heart kind of swear. This is not on my mother's grave kind of swear. These are things we hear, right? Did. It's not that type of oath. And I know you know that. Deuteronomy 10, 20 through 21, Moses here. You shall fear the Lord your God. You shall serve him and hold fast to him. And by his name you shall swear. He is your praise. He is your God. So it is an act of worship. To swear by another name, it's a way to look at it, is to worship that thing or person. The end of the paragraph reminds us, as God is our witness in making such an oath, we are calling God to judge us according to the truth of our oath. We can deceive people, but never God. Paragraph 2, the first part, this is kind of like a two-parter here. Only by the name of God can a righteous oath be sworn, and only if it is used with the utmost fear of God and reverence. Therefore, to swear vainly or rashly by the glorious and awesome name of God, or to swear by any other name or thing, is sinful and to be regarded with disgust and detestation. So only by the name of God can a righteous oath be sworn. I'd like you to turn to Hebrews 6. Hebrews 6. We're starting in verse 13. My Bible's heading here is the certainty of God's promises. I want to read verse 16 first. We have here this definition of man's purpose for an oath as a kind of a legal and binding device. For people swear, this is verse 16 in Hebrews 6, for people swear by something greater than themselves, and in all their disputes, an oath is final for confirmation. They swear by something greater than themselves. And as we go into these other verses, we see that God takes this oath-taking to its highest level. Verses 13 and 14. For when God made a promise to Abraham, since he had no one greater by whom to swear, he swore by himself, saying, surely I will bless you and multiply you. I am, our holy God, who answers to no one, swore by his name, to the promise of Abraham's future descendants. Again, just to remind you, he and Sarah were old, right? So the Lord swore by his name to this promise of future descendants and this bloodline of the Messiah to come and redeem a people unto himself. The redemption of his people he guaranteed with an oath, verses 17 and 18. So when God desired to show more convincingly to the heirs of the promise the unchangeable character of his purpose, he guaranteed it with an oath, so that by two unchangeable things in which it is impossible for God to lie, we who have fled for refuge might have strong encouragement to hold fast to the hope set before us. He swore by himself. Verse 13, nothing greater. Two unchangeable things here, his promise and his oath. And finishing out that first part of paragraph 2, our oaths are to be made in the fear of God, and not vainly, rashly, lightly. The latter part of this paragraph 2 goes directly to what the Anabaptists would refuse to do. And it says, but in matters of weight and moment, for the confirmation of truth, and for the ending of strife. So we're talking about conflicts that go on here between people. An oath is sanctioned by the word of God. Therefore, a lawful oath being imposed by a lawful authority can rightly be taken in such circumstances. Is there such a thing as a lawful oath imposed by a lawful authority? Well, their biblical understanding of Matthew 5:33 through 37 and James 5:12 said, no oath. Swear not at all. I'd like to go to those now. If you're in Hebrews, just a few pages there to James 5. Verse 12. But above all, my brothers, do not swear either by heaven or by earth or by any oath, any other oath, but let your yes be yes and your no be no, so that you may not fall under condemnation. And then Matthew 5. So we have James's words, and then we have Christ's words here in Matthew 5 concerning oaths. Verse 33. Again, you have heard that it was said to those of old, you shall not swear falsely, but shall perform to the Lord what you have sworn. But I say to you, do not take an oath at all, either by heaven, for it is the throne of God, or by the earth, for it is the footstool, or by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great King. And do not take an oath by your head, for you cannot make one hair white or black. Let what you say be simply yes or no. Anything more than this comes from evil. So let your yes be yes, your no, no. Between these two passages, one should not swear by heaven, by earth, by Jerusalem, by your head, by any other oath. Well, should we or should we not make oaths? What's going on here? Were the Anabaptists right in their convictions? Well, Matthew 23, if you want to turn a couple pages to that, sheds a little light. As Christ addresses the scribes and the Pharisees in this list of woes, in this list of hypocritical thinking. Matthew 23, 16 and 17. Woe to you, blind guides, who say, if anyone swears by the temple, it is nothing. But if anyone swears by the gold of the temple, he is bound by his oath. You blind fools, for which is greater, the gold or the temple that has made the gold sacred? And you say, if anyone swears by the altar, it is nothing. But if anyone swears by the gift that is on the altar, he is bound by his oath. You blind men, for which is greater, the gift or the altar that makes the gift sacred? So whoever swears by the altar swears by it and by everything on it. And whoever swears by the temple swears by it and by him who dwells in it. And whoever swears by heaven swears by the throne of God and by him who sits upon it. Swearing by the temple or the gold of the temple, swearing by the altar or the gift on the altar, none of these oaths were sworn to the Lord. Hypocritical thinking by the Pharisees to take oaths that are not sworn to the Lord were ones that could be broken. I wrote down here a legalistic loophole, if you would. Legalistic Jews substituted titles for God's name. I want to read William Hendrickson here to kind of give this flavor. In other words, in the thinking of scribes and Pharisees and their forerunners, An oath sworn to the Lord must be kept. An oath sworn to the Lord must be kept. On the contrary, an oath in connection with which the name of the Lord was not expressly mentioned was of a lesser significance. One did not need to be quite so conscientious about keeping it. And so in daily conversation, oaths began to multiply by heaven, and by the earth, and by Jerusalem. And according to Matthew 23:16-18, where we just were, even by the temple and by the altar. In order to make an impression, a person might utter such an oath, talking big and dispensing enormous promises. I'm sorry, I just had to drift to our politics today there a little bit. In order to make an impression, a person might utter such an oath, talking big and dispensing enormous promises. If the affirmation which he had made was a lie, or if the promise was never even meant to be kept, that was not so bad, as long as he had not sworn to the Lord. That's William Hendrickson's commentary on this. So much man thinking there, is there not? If the affirmation which he had made was a lie, or if the promise was never even meant to be kept, that was not so bad, as long as he had not sworn to the Lord. Kind of almost like making an oath or a promise and crossing your fingers behind your back, right? Nobody's ever done that as a kid or anything, right? When you put it in a tone of what these writers are putting a vow and an oath, it's wicked. And I say that humbly because we're all sinners, right? So is it okay to make an oath or a vow? Wrote down some of Paul's examples here. Romans 1:9. For God is my witness that without ceasing I mention you always in my prayers. This is another way of saying I swear before God when he says, for God is my witness. Acts 18:18 illustrates a vow. Paul returned to Antioch, cut his hair, for he was under a vow. And another one here, 2 Corinthians 1:23. Paul says, but I call God to witness against me. And that's another way of saying, I swear before God, it was to spare you that I refrained from coming again to Corinth. And we all have those conversations where we, if it's not even a formal oath, right? We think we need to emphasize that this is the truth. This is the truth coming out of me. I don't know how, when you say on my mother's grave, that's implied like I'd never lie against my mother, right? So here's Paul's examples of swearing before God, statements he made to people in this letter from Rome and the Corinthians. There's an example of Christ here. I'm going to let you that I found in my study. I kind of get it, but I think it's kind of, and this could just be my shallowness, but I think it's not that strong of an example, but I'll give you the reference here and a few cliff notes, but it's Matthew 26, 59 through 64, and you can look at that on your own. Where Christ is before Caiaphas, this is when they've taking him from the garden, and he's before Caiaphas, and Caiaphas is talking to him, and these witnesses are coming before Jesus and saying all these things that are untrue about what Christ has done. Caiaphas says, "I adjure you by the living God," and they translate this as, "I ask you under oath, are you the Son of God?" Jesus responds, takes this oath because it's true. He was the Son of God. But I'll let you look at that on your own. I'm not trying to muddy that up, but it was a little muddy for me, so I'm going there. So is it okay to take an oath? I believe so. With paragraphs 3 and 4 in tow here. So paragraph 3. Whoever takes an oath sanctioned by the word of God is bound to consider the weightiness of so solemn an act, and affirm or confess to nothing except that which he knows to be true. For by false, rash, and vain oaths the Lord is provoked, and because of them this land mourns. So consider, if you make an oath, if you make a vow to God, if you make an oath between you and another person, making a promise, consider the weightiness of that oath. Only swear to what you know is true. And what you swear to, if it involves doing, do. Leviticus 19:12, you shall not swear by my name falsely, and so profane the name of your God. I am the Lord. Numbers 30, 1 through 2. Moses speaking to the tribes of Israel. If a man vows a vow to the Lord, or swears an oath to bind himself by a pledge, he shall not break his word. He should do according to all that proceeds out of his mouth. Weighty, truthful, solemn. And plain, common sense type words. Number 4 in the confession here. An oath is to be taken in the plain and common sense of the words, without equivocation or mental reservation. So an oath should not have multiple interpretations. Without mental reservation means they're not telling the whole truth, holding things back, being vague. Clear understanding by all parties. Make every effort to be truthful in one's words. And then I wrote down here sincerity. Nothing against lawyers, but take the lawyer talk out of an oath. And this last section on vows. Again, a vow is a solemn promise made to the Lord. It's not made to other people. It's made to the Lord. A vow which is not to be made to any creature but to God alone is to be made, performed with all the utmost care and faithfulness. Do not make a vow you cannot keep. Ecclesiastes 5, 4 through 5. When you vow a vow to God, do not delay paying it, for he has no pleasure in fools. Pay what you vow. It is better that you should not vow than that you should vow and not pay. And then I wrote down here Deuteronomy 23. This is verse 21 or 23. If you make a vow to the Lord your God, you shall not delay fulfilling it, for the Lord your God will surely require it of you, and you will be guilty of sin. But if you refrain from vowing, you will not be guilty of sin. You should be careful to do what has passed your lips, for you have voluntarily vowed to the Lord your God what you have promised with your mouth. The things that come out of our mouths, right? And they reveal the heart. So a vow is a solemn promise made to the Lord. Don't make it if you can't keep it. So you have to think through things you promised God. So the last part of that, paragraph 5. Pretty plain stuff here, but monastic vows, and this is directed to the Roman Catholic Church, of a perpetual single life, profess poverty, regular obedience, so far from being degrees of higher perfection, are superstitious and sinful snares in which no Christian may entangle himself. So the confession rejects these popish vows, right? A single life, poverty, regular obedience. None of it's going to make you more spiritual. Yeah. So vows, oaths. Have you taken one lately? This seems a little bit out of our wheelhouse, at least to me. We don't take oaths anymore, per se. Just sold a business. 30 pages of paperwork. Back in these days, verbal, right? Put your hand on my thigh and swear to me that you won't let Isaac take a wife from the Canaanites. These things, between then and now, we make oaths on paper, basically. So, if you just bring us up to our world, what am I trying to say? It's still a solemn thing. It's still, are you going to invoke the name of the Lord when you make a promise to somebody? It's really a guard to what, as I finished there in Deuteronomy, what comes out of your mouth and what you promise to people and say to people. These legal things, how strong are they? That's why we have all the litigation we have in our country today, right? because even the paperwork doesn't seem to be enough in what's right or wrong. So when you kind of boil this down for me and bringing it to my world, I mean, it is this idea of character. And what I'm saying to you, can that be trusted? Making oaths throughout history. The things Jesus addressed and the falseness of those oaths, all right? The confession writers in our time, they don't carry the weight that they should. And if nothing else, that's what I came out of this with, is the weightiness of it, of what I promised to people. What are some comments you have or thoughts or? Golly, Eric, I didn't know we were going to talk about vows and oaths today. Get your thinking a little bit. I wrote down here Judges 11. Does anybody know what that vow was about? Okay, Ray. Jephthah. Do we know what happened there? What that vow was about? Yeah. Jephthah had wanted to win this battle, right? Lord, you give us this win, you give us this victory. I will sacrifice to you the first thing that comes out my door. That was his vow. And what comes out his door? His daughter. I think it's kind of unbelievable. And as I was reading some of that stuff, there's people that kind of want to work around that, what really happened, what she really sacrificed, you know, all those things. I'm hoping you're familiar with the narrative there. I have to take it literally, because even when you see the daughter's response to her father's vow, if you want to read that later, Judges 11, I'm sure she's not thrilled about it, but she's understanding the importance of a vow. That it means her life. Well, what if we lived like that? Would we keep an oath or vow to our own hurt? And you just think of one of the biggest vows bludgeoned today, and that would be marriage. So, anybody? Does any smarter people know more about the Anabaptists and this whole thing, like what their history was? I know they were persecuted big time. But when you think so that's kind of the crux of some of this stuff in the confession, is the Westminster guys, the Presbyterians, the Congregationalists, the Baptists, they were all saying it's okay to take an oath, take a vow. And we need these oaths, just like you see in those different laws with Moses, right? That there's these conflicts. There's things that go on. And we need to know what the truth is. And there was nothing, again, as these scriptures point out, there was nothing to swear higher to than God himself. And then the example of God himself swearing to something. Bill?
When you think of it, the greatest oaths in the Bible were made in those covenants that God made with man. And then he's swearing by himself that he will fulfill those promises. Like the promise made to Abraham with the animals split in half and all that. God is essentially swearing there, making an oath that I will be torn in half if I don't keep that oath. So we go back to Genesis 3:15. He's swearing by himself essentially that I'm going to do this, this, and this. And that he's swearing by his own person, his own name, his own character, that he's going to fulfill those covenants, fulfill those promises he made.
That's good. Yeah, and the covenant being between, there's two parties involved in the covenant, isn't there?